Welcome to the Manhattan Institute's event on Mayor Eric Adams's first 100 days. I'm Michael Hendrix, Senior Fellow and Director of State and Local Policy here at MI. And I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleague and Senior Fellow, Nicole Gelinas. Nicole, it's great to be with you.
Good afternoon, Michael. Happy New Year.
Same to you. All right, let's get started. So Eric Adams ran on a platform of curbing crime. Public safety has still clearly been a headline grabber in his first couple weeks and days in office. We've seen two deadly subway pushings, one very recently this year. And the new DA, Alvin seems to be heading in a very different direction than Mayor Adams when it comes to tackling crime. So what should we be looking for, and what have we seen from Mayor Adams so far on public safety?
Yeah, I think the first 2.5 weeks of the Adams mayoralty bring to mind what Harold Macmillan said in the 20th century when a reporter asked the British Prime Minister, what is going to determine what happens in your term? And he said, events, my dear boy, events. And unfortunately, we have seen a whirlwind of events over the past 2.5 weeks, many of them quite tragic, among them the fire that killed 17 people in the Bronx, and of course the killing of Crystal Bayra-Neves, the 19-year-old cashier at the Burger King in Harlem, as well as the subway pushing this past weekend of Michelle Go at Times Square. Very high-profile crimes that have kept the public's attention on really continuing what was the case during the campaign last year in a focus on public safety. Now, what has Adams' response been to this continued public focus on public safety? He came under some criticism after the subway pushing when he said that this was a matter of perception, not so much reality. But to his credit, he seemed to understand that that wasn't the right answer very quickly. He quickly turned around and said that he himself does not feel safe on the subway, and seems to have relearned, if you will, what he was saying last year, that this is a reality problem, not a perception problem. Of course, it's too early to tell whether some of the initiatives he's rolled out are working yet. The police commissioner, Commissioner Sewell, has put more police on the subway, pledged to have the above ground patrol officers take a look in the subway on their regular tours. Those are certainly good initiatives, but again, far too early to tell whether they are working yet.
Right. So I think this is a good frame that at this point, it's still too early to tell in Mayor Adams's term what exactly the efficacy will be of anything that he's rolled out so far. But I think it is a good opportunity to look forward. It is a good opportunity to discuss Mayor Adams's options and at least some of what he's rolled out so far before we see impact. But before we get to that, one quick follow-up. So the sister of the subway pusher, Michelle Go, so Simon Marshall's sister, has pleaded for mandated treatment for the severely mentally ill. So mental illness, questions around homelessness, these are also now becoming part of this public safety and disorder conversation. So give us a brief sense, what are some of Mayor Adams's options for those who are a danger to themselves and others? Have we seen any indication so far of what his response would be on that question?
Yes, once again, the alleged subway pusher, Marshall Simon, is not unknown to either the criminal justice system or the civil mental health system. He has done multiple, been a resident multiple times in mental health settings. His sister said repeatedly that she wanted to see him kept in the hospital. He served some time for a robbery conviction, went through the parole process. So once again, these are not people who are living quiet lives and suddenly snap. There are a lot of warning signs. So what are the various things that Adams can do? On the criminal justice side in the subway, securing the fare gate is something that the city has not been doing for the past few years during the de Blasio administration, both arrests for fare beating and civil summons for fare beating are down by double digits. Now, you may say, we don't treat mental illness by securing the fare gate. Of course not, but it means that someone who is suffering from severe mental illness cannot set up shop in the subway all day and be at best harassing and menacing people, making them feel unsafe so that they don't want to take the subway. And at worst, we see the murder that we saw over the past weekend. So we want interaction between the city governments and the severely mentally ill who are either living or spending a good portion of the day and night on the street. We don't want them to be left alone. Now, what should happen to them once that interaction has started? We should be using Kendra's law a lot more than we are using. Remember,
Kendra's law being...
Right. 23 years ago, we had another person, another young woman, Kendra Webdale, pushed to her death at the subway, on the subway tracks by a man who was later deemed to be severely mentally ill. His father had also tried to get him help many, many times. And so the law that the state legislature enacted said that certain petitioners, if a person is seriously mentally ill and will not accept voluntary treatment, can petition the court and say this person has to go through an involuntary treatment process, which Eric Botcher, our council person in the Times Square district, said the other day. Involuntary treatment saved his own life when he was a young man. So involuntary treatment, it doesn't have to be in a locked setting. It can be a medication in a therapy regime that you have to comply with, or it can be a period of time in a locked facility.
And this is what Marshall's sister was
right,
effectively calling for. We only have so much time here for our conversations. This is really a good one. There's so many great questions coming from the audience. Please keep them up. So Judy asked a question about Alvin Bragg. How will Eric Adams be able to successfully work with Bragg?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great question, and that's going to be one of the real challenges here, to assuming that Adams's police department is far more assertive and proactive at stopping large crimes by focusing on the smaller crimes. Again, stop the fare beating before it turns into a more serious subway crime. Bragg is looking to be an impediment. The DA said on his third day in office, pretty much anything short of murder and some very serious sex crimes and public corruption, he's not going to seek a prison sentence for. And those things include armed robbery, including armed robbery with a gun. So in the case of Crystal Bayron-Neves targeted at the Burger King, if the armed robber had not killed her, if we take Bragg at his word, he would not seek a carceral sentence for that person. And so if you have enough armed robberies, some of those are going to turn into murders. And so you want to hopefully deter the armed robbery in the first place, but stop it also before it turns into a murder. So I think what we see is, the good news is enormous pushback against Bragg from the public. He himself seems nervous about this. He's hired a crisis PR team, but the real crisis is his own ideas. So hopefully we will see him start to change his mind effectively and back away from some of these ideas. If not, will Commissioner Sewell continue to push back and say, we cannot secure the subway system if there is no consequence for repeated fare beating? Not someone who beats the fare once should get off with a warning. Someone who does it a few times may get a civil ticket, but people who are essentially using the subway system not as a place of transit, but as a place of refuge, and in many cases causing trouble for other people. If you do not stop these smaller crimes, very, very difficult to stop the larger crimes.
So I want to stay on this related subject just for a moment before we pivot to others. So Rikers, we can't forget this. Rikers is another big issue, one you've written on, Nicole. We've seen disturbing reports of gang-run wards. We've seen overstaffing and underserving. Disturbing evidence that Rikers Island is sometimes more like Torture Island. What options does Mayor Adams have here for tackling this, and what signs are you seeing of his approach?
Well, I think some of the options are just plain competence in taking a more competent approach to managing the jail complex. We have never had it as bad as it got during the De Blasio administration, during the Bloomberg administration, during the Giuliani administration, and even before. The rate of inmate on inmate violence, inmate on guard violence was much, much lower than it has been in the past 2 years. And also, Adams has said he would bring back punitive segregation when it is needed to impose discipline on an inmate. You cannot have people who know that they can inflict harm on other people, and because they are already in jail and they may face a conviction and a long sentence for a serious crime, there's essentially no deterrent for them to act badly at Rikers unless you have that tool of punitive segregation. But these are people who are in the city's custody, so the city has to treat them humanely, have adequate medical care, safety from other inmates. And I think one important thing that Maud Marone and others have brought up is we have to speed up the trial process. People sitting 2 years, even longer, and the process of going to court, very, very slow. Just speeding that process up, it will help reduce the inmate population in Rikers, either by sending people home or sending them on to state prison.
So I want to pivot here. We have a great question from Brian. He notes that, and this is something I wanted to get to in just a little bit anyway, that the motto for Eric Adams in his first 100 days is GSD, get stuff done. So his question is like, have we seen what have been some concrete proposals that we've seen from Mayor Adams so far that speak to that idea of getting stuff done? What has really stood out to you?
Yeah, it's interesting because, if we go back to the Harold Macmillan quote, the events, my dear boy, events, one of the reasons that a mayor has to know exactly what he wants to do even before he or she takes office and get that done quickly is that if you don't wake up every morning knowing exactly what is the progress I want to make on my long-term goal today, you will just be overwhelmed by these events. I mean, a mayor could spend his or her entire term going from catastrophic events to catastrophic events. That's a good thing, of course. Part of the mayor's role is to comfort people in distress and be on the scene of things that happen. But you don't want to lose sight of what is the larger picture. And it's still not clear what Adams's larger picture is. Very obvious that in some parts of city government, he just wants to maintain the status quo. Yesterday, he named a planning commissioner and the deputy, both Dan Garotnik and the former the Manhattan Borough Planning Commissioner, indication that he's pretty happy with the direction the planning department has been going in over the past few years. I don't think we'll see any big shakeups there. With crime, obviously, the goal there is to get the violent crime rate down while having respectful policing practices, which is certainly enough in itself. I think in other areas of government, Transportation Commissioner Idanis Rodriguez has put together a very clear plan and announced some concrete ways to achieve that plan yesterday in identifying hundreds of more intersections and making them safer. He's also said he wants to build 100 new miles of protected bike lanes. Very clear things that we can say in a few months. Did Rodriguez do those things or did he not? I think with other areas of government, still a little bit fuzzy on what Adams's goals are. For example, no big infrastructure project that he has announced yet. And if you want to achieve an infrastructure project, you have to start that really, really early, even if you get 2 terms.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. So on Mayor Adams's first day, he said, "This is not about showmanship; it's about showing up." And so he's really emphasized this getting stuff done agenda. But we're still waiting to see what that agenda does look like. That said, during his campaign, he did release 100+ ideas Some very detailed, others just kind of broadly sketched out. But that is kind of it does point to the direction that he wants to head in. You really commend that document to you to get a sense of where his head's at. It really does seem like a lot of this has come down to making appointments right now, equipping those who have been appointed to do their job. Well, one thing that's I find interesting though is just watching him hand out GSD masks, watching him even on his first day take the subway to work. I think it was second day bike to work. Racing the scene of a tragic fire, comforting wounded police. That in saying things like when a mayor has swagger, the city has swagger. It's like there's a mayor, but he's also becoming this meme. It's like a mimetic mayoralty. And so is there really maybe question, is there really tension between the showing up and the showmanship, that those can kind of go together? Is there something about his style and approach that where would you place that in the long history of mayors in New York City from what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I think personality wise, he comes very close to Ed Koch in that Ed Koch was also a cheerleader for the city, very brash, spoke his mind, was out there with New Yorkers, constantly saying, "How am I doing?" Walking the streets. So we're getting back to that, a sort of real hands-on retail style mayoralty. I think that it works as long as the public thinks that what the mayor is saying lines up to what they are perceiving. So if he goes on the subway, he sees, unfortunately, a homeless, possibly mentally ill person sleeping on the subway, and he says, "This is disturbing to me. I see this in person, and this is a reminder that I have to fix it." The public can agree with that and get on board with that. But if he then pivots to saying, "It's only a perception problem," that's when the showmanship and the showing up, they start to conflict with what the public is seeing. And I think this only goes so far. If we're sitting here in April or in June or in the fall or a year from now, and his method is still very hands-on retail, this is what I see and this is what I have to fix, then the public's question will start to become, why is it not fixed yet? Again, far too early to declare either victory or defeat for the new mayor, but he has to keep in mind this will only take him so far. It only took Koch so far. I mean, and it took a while for Koch to kind of get on people's nerves, but certainly by the third term, people were a little bit tired of the kind of "how am I doing" shtick, because they were just very frustrated with the lack of progress on various issues, including crime.
Right, and there were lessons from Mayor Bloomberg too on how to stay focused on core objectives.
Yeah.
Sean Donovan, who went on to be HUD secretary, ultimately ran for mayor in this most recent cycle, said that when he was housing commissioner for New York, every time he showed up in City Hall, he had to make sure that he memorized the number of affordable housing units that had been built or preserved in case he ran into Mayor Bloomberg in the hallway, because that would be the first question you'd ask them. Just staying relentlessly focused on certain metrics was big for Mayor Bloomberg and part of
Yeah.
him staying focused.
Yeah, even Jeanette Sadiq has said, Bloomberg would give her the freedom to carry out experimental changes to the city streets, but he was very focused on the numbers. So you had to be able to say traffic deaths are down by X% over the past few years. Since we installed this bike lane, no one has died in this corridor. I mean, holding commissioners accountable to both their goals and your own goals is certainly important, and doing that on a timeline.
Now, I do want to talk about something that is maybe really broadly outside of the day-to-day control of a mayor, but maybe part of the events dominating Mayor Adams' at least first year in office, and that's COVID, offices, commuting, things like that. So, most of the major employers aren't back. Omicron's paused life for a while. Looks like it's trending downward, but it's still part of what we've seen over the past couple of years of COVID continuing to intrude in the life of the city. Some subway stops are back, kind of in the farther reaches of the city. But if you, again, as the New York Times reported a couple days ago, if you go down to Wall Street, even during normal office hours, that stop in downtown is still pretty dead. Is this a crisis for Adams's first 100 days, or a chance for him to just pivot to new priorities? What are we seeing here?
I think it shows that we need to see some real improvement on the quality of life in Midtown Manhattan in particular, or we really risk that the either work from home or work in an office closer to my home becomes a permanent way of life. I mean, we're going into the 2-year anniversary of this. People may not enjoy working at home, but they've certainly proven that they can do it.
Right. And after 2 years, how temporary is this adjustment to
Right,
life?
exactly. I mean, the MTA has lost riders over the past 2 months. I mean, they were closer to 60% on subway ridership. Now they're back down to 45, 50%. Some of that is the bad weather, some of that is Omicron, but a lot of that is people being worried on the subway. And again, that is both a reality and a perception problem where if Michelle Go, a professional woman, loved being in New York City, was taking the subway despite these concerns that most people have been thinking about over the past few months, and to have this happen to her, a lot of people who feel like she could have been them, professional women in particular, who have the choice to stay home, are going to say, you know what, I don't have to take that risk on the subway today. I can either do this another day, or I can do it at home, or I'll take an Uber or Lyft. So that really holds back the MTA's revenue, the ridership growth. And until we get people back using the subway on a casual basis without even really thinking about it, we really can't recover Manhattan's economy.
Right. And it seems like there's another angle to this too, where New York still has an enormous jobs deficit, not just for the state, the city itself. We're talking one of the worst jobs deficit of any major city in the country. Among Mayor Adams's first moves was to call on city agencies to reform the fines and fees for small businesses. That was his kind of first initial step to tackling that jobs deficit and helping small businesses get back. Is it enough, though? Does he have options for getting jobs back to New York?
Yeah, I think that was a good sign from him. One of the major things that he's going to carry out is de Blasio's promise to make open restaurants permanent and have a regime for that where restaurant owners and their customers have a place to eat outside. Very good for the streetscape over time, hopefully good for public safety because it gets more eyes on the streets. But we need some kind of consistent way of having a standard for these outdoor dining structures, how far they can go out onto the sidewalk, what should happen during the winter months when they're not being used, and so forth. So that will be a good test of the balance between, you need regulation, but you also want restaurants to be able to use this as flexibly as they can within that regulation. But I think the biggest issue is that in Manhattan, they need their customers. I mean, we want good governments, of course, but restaurants, retailers, they can put up with a certain degree of bad government as long as they have customers. Without the office workers, without the international tourist, very, very hard. I mean, you see in Grand Central, both Cafe Centro and Naples appear to have closed for good. A lot of empty restaurant and retail spaces. So that really just depends on getting people back. Even things like Adams setting up like a civilian corps of people in bright sweatshirts or t-shirts just to greet people in Manhattan, maybe give out coffee, just show people coming back that there is someone looking out for you, and maybe working with the outreach teams to call in someone who looks to be in distress at one of the major transit stations or out on the sidewalk.
Speaking of jobs, what do you make of Mayor Adams's new hires and new appointments? His first appointment was school's chancellor. We've seen debates on some of his appointments, or debates about debated appointments. What do you make of them so far? Also, do you have suggestions for new hires?
I think most of the hires have been good in that they're counterintuitive and interesting. For example, Commissioner Sewell grew up in New York, so she understands New York, but she was not an NYPD insider. So getting someone who knows the city, knows the NYPD, but who comes from the outside, I think was a good idea. The same thing with schools chancellor Banks, getting someone who ran the Eagle Academies, which are like charter schools, but they're not charter schools. So on one hand, he knows how to deal with the union. On the other hand, he sees the need for autonomy in schools management. Those things are good. I think Garotnik is a good pick for the city planning. I think that the things that we have to be a little wary, if not negative about, are, of course, as many people have said, picking Philip Banks to be deputy mayor of public safety seems highly problematic. We don't have to get through his whole history here, but what people read in the paper about his coming very close, to say the least, to major corruption scandal. Not, he really has to behave like Caesar's wife, and I think that's the optimistic thing that we could say, is that hopefully he's learned his lesson. We have to hope that that's true, and obviously Frank Caroni, chief of staff. Involved in many different businesses that do business with the city. Of course, he said that he's not going to be doing that and has put his assets in a blind trust. Very difficult to do. Again, the optimistic take would be that people have learned their lessons from history and previous mayoral scandals, but so far in terms of the arc of history, that's never happened.
Right. I mean, there's been a lot of debate, especially on places like Twitter, around these appointments. Not to dismiss that, but a recent Siena poll just came out finding that 64% of New York City residents approve of Mayor Adams. Clearly, he's doing something right. How can he keep this support up? How, especially like with the framework of who got him to office? He won his primary really on the strength of the working class vote, especially working class Black and Latino voters. How can he keep up that relatively high level of support? How can he continue to secure his base?
I think by the end of the first quarter, we need to see some clear progress on the murder rate. We don't need to get it, and of course, we don't want anyone to be murdered, but it doesn't have to get back to below 2019 immediately. But we need to see some clear progress in the right direction. If we go into a third year of the close to 50% murder rate that we saw in 2020 kind of stagnating there like it did last year, that would be a good sign. I think we also need to see some clear improvement in the day-to-day quality of life, that people have to feel safe commuting into Penn Station. They have to feel like they're not walking by people who are either in obvious distress or people who are harassing them on their commute. So just improving the quality of life in Midtown and seeing real progress on the murder rate citywide. Those would be excellent accomplishments for the first few months in office.
And how much of this will be determined also by Mayor Adams's relationship with Governor Hochul? This clearly is an important figure for New York City as well.
Yeah, that's our final piece of this political puzzle. We talked about Bragg being a possible impediment. I think Hochul has shown that she wants to get along with Adams. And things like adding more state money for mental health outreach on the subways. A very good initiative. Hopefully, we'll see some progress on that. Some initiatives on housing and infrastructure that she announced in her own budget the other day. We'll see Adams announce his first budget in the next few days. But yes, I think the signs that Hochul is not impeding Adams and probably wants to have a good relationship with him going into her own election season. She's the big question too is, does she start to push back against Bragg? She has been very quiet about this so far, even though some of her would-be opponents in the fall are saying if Bragg continues to show that he can't keep the public safe, she will have to step in at some point. So does she start to be more assertive in what she's saying, that we cannot let armed robbers go without any sense of deterrence in the city?
So, for the past couple of minutes, I think you've given us a sense of what we should be looking for by early April. That will be the
Yeah.
100-day mark. It'll be a milestone for Mayor Adams. We at the Manhattan Institute keep an eye out for this. We'll be having a series of events around that time as well, just taking stock, taking the temperature of New York City at that point. So please stay tuned. Thank you so much, Nicole. For everybody watching, please like this video, share it, subscribe to our Manhattan Institute channels. We'd be honored for your support as well. This is how we can keep these conversations going. So thanks again to you. Thanks, Nicole. Please stay tuned for more events to come, particularly in April, but in the months to come as well. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Michael.